Start recording. First, Grace is going to say an announcement, and then any one of the guest speakers, you can decide who gets to go first, second, and third. Okay.
So, as many of you know, our club advisor is Dr. Maslow. She does a lot of amazing research. And then on Earth Day, she is hosting an opportunity for research. And it's not sponsored by the Wildlife Society, but it is going to be an opportunity open to us. And essentially, it's a chance to work with Green Acres to plant like 200 trees. And if you did want to go, it would be on Earth Day from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And if you have any other questions, you can just reach out to me in the opportunities group chat and I can give you more information. There will be pizza.
And that's the announcement that we have. Remember, Rutgers Wildlife Society has nothing to do with it. You guys go independently. So any one of our guest speakers can go first. The order doesn't matter. Should I just choose? I'm just gonna choose who's on the, okay, Gabby.
Cool. So I did make a little PowerPoint. Can I just go ahead and share that? Great. Just get this. There we go. All right. You all should be able to see my screen.
Yep.
Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. My bad. There we go. Cool. So my presentation is called Lions at the Disco because I'm a little extra, and it's going to be about my work doing human-wildlife interactions in Southern Africa. So just kind of a little introduction as to who I am. I am a conservation biologist. What I do is I specialize in human-wildlife interactions. So basically, people interact with wildlife in all kinds of different ways, and wildlife interacts with people. Those can be positive, like cultural, historical significance, and they also can be negative. And I kind of focus kind of more on the negative side of the equation, which is called human-wildlife conflict. And that could be anything from lions eating people's livestock or from, you know, a bear knocking over someone's trash can. All of that's human-wildlife conflict. I focus mostly on big cats or big carnivores in sub-Saharan Africa and livestock loss with farmers. So carnivore livestock conflict. So I mostly worked in Eastern Southern Africa. My dad is Brazilian of Angolan descent, so I grew up kind of like really interested in Southern Africa and the SADC region, so that's kind of where I ended up. So I've worked in South Africa, where I did my master's degree, Namibia, Mozambique, Kenya, and soon Botswana, which is where my PhD research is going to be. So how did I get into conservation? This is a picture of me when I started, and this is a picture of where I ended up, which is a field office in Kenya. So I am a pediatric cancer survivor. I was in the hospital from ages 7 to 9, and I was already rabidly interested in animals. I had a little tin under my bed that said Gabby Goes to Angola Fund, and I used to put quarters in there to try to do that. But while I was in the hospital, because I couldn't really go outside or do much, I just read a lot about wildlife. I got into literature, and just watched a bunch of nature documentaries and just got more and more interested in becoming part of this field. So it's definitely been something that I've done my whole life. And another thing that I've kind of had to overcome is that I have a reconstructed left leg. So I've had to basically learn how to walk again and go through PT. But becoming a conservationist, I knew I had to be really physically active. So that actually helped motivate me to do that. So sometimes I say that, becoming a conservationist actually is what saved my leg and helped me learn how to walk again. So it's definitely been part of my life. And this is just a really cool picture I love, which was my first study area in southern Kenya. This is Amboseli in an area called the Chulu Hills. And it's a group of bull elephants that were hanging out, some juveniles, which is really exciting. So my undergrad thesis was on lion livestock conflicts in Amboseli. What I did is I basically looked at all the different factors that drive conflict between lions eating people's livestock, but also how farmers feel about lions. So there are cultural factors and historical factors. And one of the things I found out was that with the Maasai, which are the group of people who live in southern Kenya, one of the groups of people who live in southern Kenya, they had been historically moved off their land like 100 years ago and still had a lot of resentment towards the government. And they actually were thinking, you know, like of lions as the government's animal. So when conflict happened, they were even more driven to, you know, want to kill lions because they saw it as almost like a protest action. And they also, the other thing is that lions are seen as very prestigious in their culture to kill. So if they killed lions, they were like really tough guys. And so there were all these other cultural impacts about why they were doing it. And then I did my master's degree at the University of Cape Town through a Rotary Ambassadorial Scholarship. And I did research on land cover change in an area called Rumfasmak in the Northern Cape of South Africa. And what I was looking at is basically during apartheid, all the people from that area had been moved off. And then Rumfasmak was the first place where people actually got their land back once apartheid ended. So I was looking at now these people were back, you know, what are the impacts on the land with grazing and things like that. So why do I do this? I'm really fascinated by carnivore livestock conflict because you have biological factors like behavioral ecology, but you also have cultural and historical factors as well. So there's a lot of different interdisciplinary fields mixed in there. It's global. There's a lot of different things you can look at. It changes depending on the context, but you see some of the same issues that you would in India as you would in sub-Saharan Africa, as you would in North America. So that's always been really fascinating. And sometimes it's hard. This is a picture of the first animal I saw lost to human wildlife conflict, where we were going to a farm for the first time. And the guy told us basically on the phone that if you don't come deal with this cheetah who had been eating my calves, I'm going to shoot it. And we didn't get there in time. And he presented me with a cheetah skin, which was kind of like a sobering reminder. And the sad thing about that is it actually was a leopard, not a cheetah. So he just kind of killed a random cheetah. So sometimes there are losses, and that's hard. So this kind of is the proof there that it was a leopard. There was a bite on the back of the neck, and cheetahs don't do that. So it was kind of a sad, sad situation. So there's a lot of complexities behind carnivore livestock conflict. Carnivores can get really used to different things. So if you put out different deterrents like flashing light systems or like alarm systems, they get used to it very quickly. So you have to constantly be changing things. Like you're playing chess against a really smart player. Like the average jackal is way smarter than me. So to constantly change things up. Also spatial partitioning, depending what other carnivores are in the area, they also influence each other's behaviors. If you have lions in the ecosystem, they have huge impacts on all the other carnivores and how they interact. So also understanding how they all move through space. For a lot of animals like African wild dogs, those intergroup dynamics are really important. So how the different individuals within a group influence each other. And sometimes there's individuals who are more likely to go after livestock than others, and that influences behavior. There's also, like I said, cultural aspects, which changes depending on what communities you're working on. Perceptions may not, the important thing in this field is that how people perceive risk is more important than actual risk. So sometimes people will think, you know, an animal is a bigger problem than it is. They might really hate African wild dogs because African wild dogs tend to rip apart their prey, and it's really dramatic and scary if it happens to your cow. But it actually might be true that jackals are a bigger problem in terms of people losing more livestock to jackals than African wild dogs. But because of what African wild dogs do, people hate them more. So working with those different perceptions. Political ecology, so basically what's happened in the past. Yeah, so there's a lot of different factors I like. Another thing I did is I did a human wildlife conflict video game I basically created with a friend. We have a publication coming out soon, which is a text-free human wildlife conflict mitigation video game with 3 mini games, which we beta tested with NIASA Carnivore Project in Mozambique. I know I'm going really fast, but it's because I don't want to take up too much time because I know everyone else has to go too. I also did work in Namibia. So I ran the human wildlife conflict research group in Cheetah Conservation Fund in the ecology department. I tested out different deterrents like e-shepherd collars, which go around the neck of a goat and emit a high-pitched, scary sound when predators chase them, which breaks the attack pattern of predators, so seeing how effective that is. Fox lights, flashing light systems at livestock enclosures to try to scare away predators, and did a lot of community education work as well with the local communities. And I'm planning to do research in Botswana with 2 organizations, Cheetah Conservation Botswana and Botswana Predator Conservation Trust. And that's going to be manipulating spatial partitioning of carnivores So I'm going to be using lion scat to try to create a perception of high lion density in the area to see if that can manipulate how other predators kind of lower down the trophic levels, like African wild dogs and jackals, to see if I can scare them away, essentially, from commercial farms, as well as testing out some other deterrents. Breaking in is a hard field to break into, especially if you want to do international conservation. It's very competitive. But I always say when a door closes, don't wait for a window to open, build a better door. The way I broke in is basically coming up with skill sets. I taught myself QGIS and R off message boards and YouTube because I had no money. And then by doing that, I was able to connect to organizations that I wanted to work with on the ground. I would save money by doing retail stints or whatever jobs I could find to get as much money as possible that would fund my plane ticket. And I would make deals with the organization where if I used my skill sets, they would cover my living expenses for a certain amount of time and I would be able to gain experience. So when I was first trying to get international experience, that was really important. So I learned Python and R and open source software and QGIS. I also learned how to teach others, because that was another thing I could say is that if you, for example, to an organization, if you let me go to this organization and learn, then I'll teach your team the skill set, which is going to be really helpful. So coming to them with something and not just saying, I want experience, but this is what I'm bringing to the table is, I think, really important. I also cold emailed paper authors. So one thing, the first thing I did when I was looking into the field was I was really interested in carnivore conservation. So I would look at all the papers on human wildlife conflict I could find, all the papers on big cats I could find, and then find the names of the people who kept coming up and up in the literature, because it's usually quite a small group of people. And then I would network with them. So I'd ask questions of them, or sometimes they didn't answer. Sometimes they were really nice and answered a lot of my questions. But creating those relationships is really important. I put it all in an Excel spreadsheet as to when I contact them, what about, what they do, why I want to talk to them. And just kind of over time created those relationships. I got an internship out of the fact that I emailed a guy who is a great photographer and conservationist that I liked his photo of a human wildlife conflict event. And through talking with him, I was able to like parlay that into an internship in Kenya. So you never know what will happen. Late nights reading literature, and just kind of had to get skilled. However, I had to do that, even if I had to teach myself, offer that skill and then trade that for experience. How to become a conservation biologist. Networking is crucial. So building those networks, and you can do that just from your computer. You don't need to even attend a conference when you're first starting out. Just connect with people on Twitter, connect with people however you can. Look at scholarships and opportunities. Fulbright's a really good one. NSF, EREU can do some really great, helps fund some research projects. I also got, like, for example, a Rotary scholarship, which is outside of conservation. So sometimes looking outside of conservation, you can parlay that into your work. Thinking outside the box and being constantly learning. I like this photo because I didn't have shin guards and I was running around in like thorn bushes and my legs were getting all ripped up. So I took like a plastic bag and wrapped it around my shin. So sometimes thinking outside the box is important. And that's pretty much it. So that's my presentation.
We're gonna have questions after each guest, after all the guest speakers have spoken, but we'll save for that. Next can be Sara.
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a different idea of what this would be like. So kudos, Gabby, that like blew me away. I want to ask you questions. Okay, so I don't usually work with Zoom. Let me try to figure out how to share. Great, okay, it's the same. Can everyone see that?
Yeah, now we can see.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I focused mostly on like just putting pictures that I had of my experience. And I figured I would kind of talk on the fly. So maybe reel me in if I start getting off track. But I started my slides with early college, but I guess I'll give a little background as Gabby did. I like that. I was born in Venezuela and my family moved to the US when I was around 9. Like Gabby, similar situation or totally different situation. I didn't have exposure to nature because I grew up in the capital city, which is bigger than New York City. So there wasn't a lot of outdoor space or a lot of places to go and yeah, learn about wildlife and nature. So I watched a lot of documentaries and whatever books we could get our hands on. I try to look through them. Got to the US, in upstate New York, central New York, there's a lot of land. I was able to go outside more, and that kind of solidified my love for nature. And I decided to go into a career in, I went into environmental science and then figured out that I actually wanted to do ecology. Fortunately, the school I went to for an environmental science degree focused highly on ecology. So first 2 years, you're getting all your gen eds out of the way. I was fortunate that I got into an honors program that allowed me to start taking classes early on. And at that point, like Abby said, you start networking. I started talking to a lot of professors and approaching a lot of graduate students at my university and asking them, how can I get more experience? How can I apply what I'm learning in the classroom outside? How can I do that? And I landed some volunteer positions helping a few grad students. You can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but here and here, same day, picture, but those are the only two pictures I have of this time. That was the first time I got to hold a bird. It's also the first time I got to do field work and field work with a academic focus. So I was helping a grad student do some bird banding. I also, contacted professors about doing independent studies. So, worked hard in classes, showed them I was interested, brought this idea to them, and they said, yeah, let's figure something out. So I was able to do an independent study in nearby woods, collecting plants and learning about the history of that area, and yeah, gaining experience in other areas. So first bird banding, then field botany. And then I also, I don't know if work study is a thing at Rutgers, but where I was doing my degree, you work for your department, but in something that's applicable. And for me, that turned into doing museum specimen prep, which is, I don't know if you've ever done it, but you take dead birds, specifically in this case, and then you stuff them with cotton and label all the information that was given with that bird, and then put it into the museums. Our university museum, I helped keep that and add to it. And that was early on. The later few years, I kept that working relationship with my advisor and the grad students that I had worked with before, and moved into an honors thesis. So I ended up liking birds a lot. I decided that I wanted to do behavioral ecology and started a thesis program or thesis project looking at behavior of house sparrows to novel objects. So how do they react to something that's new in their environment, and how does that affect their fitness, or how many young they can fledge. And then I also was able and fortunate enough to get some paid work over the summer doing monitoring. So around the Great Lakes, there was some work on whether to increase lake levels or decrease them, or mimic more natural conditions, and that affected the wetlands around the lakes. And I helped in monitoring the avifauna and herpetofauna, so doing bird monitoring and frog monitoring, which those skills really helped me out in the future, learning bird calls and frog calls. Then I decided to go to graduate school. It's different from most other people, this kind of fell in my lap, to be honest. I had been applying for positions post grad school or post undergrad. And one of the positions I applied for was in Chile because I wanted to do international work. I wanted to go back to South America and get in touch with some of my roots. And I applied for a position for the summer going and helping with a program dealing with Daegu sociality. So Daegus are these rodents you see in the back. They're social rodents, which is pretty interesting, kind of like rats. They have a good social dynamic. But I actually didn't get that position, but I was so interested and I kept reaching out to that advisor or the PI of that program. And he said, well, I can't give you the position for the summer, but do you want to come on and join me as a grad student? And I said, yes, of course, this is great. And yeah, gained experience creating your own project and leading a team out in the field. And I think the whole experience of grad school, for me at least, gave me skills that are applicable not just in academia but outside of it, because you learn how to coordinate a project from beginning to end, and you get invested in that. I didn't have pictures of me teaching or doing outreach during this time, but I also tried to dabble a little bit in that to expand my skill base. And then during grad school, I did focus mostly on the ecological aspects of things. I did work multiple jobs to support myself, but in the summers, I tried to get jobs that were field-based and in as many different fields of ecology that I could. So I took a bat position where we were helping to track the little brown bats in order to figure out, so this was in North Dakota, figure out where they might have been roosting and the locations they were using before white nose syndrome got to that area. We figured out the summer after that it was already in the area, and the work was a little behind on that, but it was still really useful. I also have a picture, kind of like Gabby said, one of the things you have to do in field ecology, especially if you come from maybe lower income situation, is get creative. Everyone else has these like brand name tents and great hiking boots, and I still remember buying my first pair of hiking boots and thinking they were going to change my life, and then even at this point using a tarp to keep the water out of my tent. Anyway, after grad school, I didn't really have, I feel like some people, like Gabby, you seemed very like goal oriented, and that is so amazing. I wish I had that skill. I feel like I'm floundering through life. Sometimes I know I want to work outside. I know I want to work in conservation with animals, with plants. So I kind of applied to anything and everything and got this position working with red-winged blackbirds. It was a field tech position, but it gave me a lot of other useful skills. One of them being how to overcome tough outdoor conditions. We worked in, very cold temperatures. This is also in North Dakota at the beginning of the spring, and then moved into summer, which got a little better, but a lot buckier. Then my positions after that, I started aiming a little higher. I can't talk too much about my first one. It was working with a private company, doing some consulting around wind farms, but I had to sign something saying I can't talk too much about it, but basically monitoring for endangered species around those. And then my dream, ideal, perfect job came around, which ended up being through a nonprofit study abroad group where I was helping to lead undergraduates through class, but also through practical conservation work. I ended up going to Patagonia through this, where I got to apply the skills that I had learned both through teaching and field biology to do hands-on conservation work with some endangered species and just even common species in that area. They do have a program in Botswana, which Gabby, I'll have to let you know about. Then COVID hit, program ended early, we all came home, and it was a few months of looking for positions at that point, which was kind of difficult. But then I got to here, to DC, where I am now, which is working with the Forest Service as a resource assistant, which is it is an internship getting my foot in the door, but it is opening possibilities at, like I mentioned earlier, like higher level decision-making role, which I think is interesting. I love doing the outdoor part, but I want to see some of that translated into action. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to do just that. It's a little bit out of my field of expertise, so I focus mostly on wildlife, and this has a lot more to do with forestry, which I'd be happy to talk about that as well. Yeah, that's all I have for now. I guess hopefully I didn't go off the tracks too much on that. I don't know how to stop sharing. Oh, there it is. Okay, I see it. But yeah, thank you for asking me to present. Sorry.
Thank you. Luz, you can go now.
Yes, I'm going to share as well. So my presentation is a lot less full of beautiful pictures. I work mostly in an office and don't have as much field experience as the others, so it's going to be very different, just warning you. And basically my background, just before I start with my academic background, I am also from Latin America. Originally, I grew up in Mexico, and my mom is from Ecuador, so I basically have both citizenships. And when I was about 12 years old, we moved to Europe because of my dad's job. So I spent a lot of time in Europe as well. And that's where I actually studied most of university. So in Brussels, in Belgium. And my undergrad and initial academic background was in biology. But I would say that we didn't really have that much field work. So I still don't have as much experience as the other two speakers, which I'm pretty jealous about. Now that I've been working, in an office for so long, I'm like, oh, that work sounds so much fun. But yeah, so I am a biologist by training. And then I did also a specialization in environmental management, which was a lot more broader. So, just like understanding the relationships between water use, pollution, just quite broad. But I knew I was really interested in working in environmental studies. And actually before choosing that career, just, for those who might be more hesitant and don't really know what they want to do, I actually was hesitating a lot with psychology. And I don't know why at the last minute before enrolling, I just decided to go with biology. And I don't really regret, but it's just to say that you can definitely be interested in different fields. And I think I definitely feel that way, even like now after having worked for a few years, I still feel like I'm interested in so many things. And I think a lot of people tell you that you need to specialize in something, but I don't think it's necessarily true. And so that's just an advice in general, that, you don't feel like you have to just really focus on something specific. It helps for sure. It helps a lot, but I don't think that if you want to switch, throughout your career, I think it's doable. And then, so after I finished those degrees, I came back home to Ecuador, where my parents were living, and I started working in a small consultancy, which was basically working on international development projects funded by USAID. So I don't know how familiar folks are with USAID, but it's basically the Agency for International Development Aid of the US. And so with this consultancy, we would help with basically the environmental compliance part of the projects that USAID would fund throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. So we would work a lot in the region. It was actually a position where I got to travel a lot, which was a lot of fun. Got to work in Central America and a few other countries in Latin America. And one example of the type of work we would do is if USAID would have like a project of, you know, helping with agricultural development in Paraguay, let's say, we would basically train their staff involved in that project so that they would make sure that there won't be too many environmental impacts related to that project. So all projects that are being developed by USAID have to go through this sort of environmental assessment and environmental compliance process to make sure that they don't end up resulting in you know, bad environmental practices and negative effects. So that was a lot of the work we did. And because it was a consultancy, we also would have other types of projects. So it was pretty diverse. And I got to work on a few climate change projects more specifically, and climate change will always come up as, you know, the big challenge. And I just realized how important that would be for a lot of the region, and well, for basically everyone, but the region was particularly affected and would be affected in the future as well. So I got really interested in that, and I felt like I didn't have enough, you know, knowledge or information to be able to really tackle those projects seriously. So I kind of decided I wanted to specialize in that. And so I got a chance to go do a master's degree at the Columbia University, which is called Climate and Society program. And it's a one-year program at the Earth Institute. So it was really good because it was short, but still very comprehensive and quite intense. So the program just tells you a lot about climate science, and is also very specific around developing countries. So, which is what I was really interested in. Similar to Sara, I wanted to, you know, go back to my region and really try to support developing countries in adapting to climate change. So that was pretty much my objective. So that program was great, and I had to do a few internships through that program. So that's where I got more experience in climate change specifically. So one of the projects I did, which was more research, was with one of the research centers at Columbia, which is called the IRI. So it's International Research Institute for Climate and Society. And that research institute works a lot with developing countries again. And what we looked at was the relationship between environmental and climate factors in terms of cholera incidence in a few countries in Africa. So that was, you know, again, not field work at all. It was mainly like looking through Excel data and matching that with cholera data to see, you know, how those two relate, but it was super interesting. And then I did another longer internship with Center for Climate Systems Research, which is also another research center from Colombia. And there we worked in a project that was aiming to integrate climate science in conservation projects. So it was really interesting too, because it was with, you know, the idea that a lot of conservation work now is not really, or is not yet thinking about how the climate will change. And so that really integration of how is climate going to affect your project and how you should update your project to be able to, you know, stand the impacts of climate change was really cool. And it was, again, just a lot of like, you know, literature research and trying to figure out how to communicate climate science, which can get like so complicated because it's a lot of uncertainty. Like, you know, you give like these numbers, like you have 30% chance of getting more rainfall in like the next 30 years. And people are like, okay, what do I do with that? So it was really like finding ways to communicate that and how can that really be used by those projects effectively and in a way that will make them be more resilient to climate change. So that was really cool. But then I kind of change fields a little bit, or like, I guess more like specializations. And it was kind of like an accident, I would say. So basically I had to do another internship, and I applied to an internship at CDP, which is a completely different field. CDP is an NGO that works on corporate sustainability stuff. So it's really helping companies to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions impact and their environmental impact in general. So the reason why I applied, it was a pretty interesting project. And I didn't have any experience, honestly, in that field at all. My previous work experience had been more on the international development side and more on the climate adaptation side rather than mitigation side. So this work is a lot more climate mitigation. Does everyone know the difference between the two, or should I explain that quickly? Because I'm happy to, if that helps.
Explain.
Yeah. So climate mitigation is basically trying to reduce the emissions so that climate change won't really, or that climate change will be reduced so that we wouldn't see as much climate change. So the temperature increase that we're expecting will be limited. Whereas climate adaptation kind of assumes that you are going to have climate change anyway, and there are, already changes that we're seeing and that are going to happen regardless of whether, tomorrow we completely stop emitting emissions. So climate adaptation assumes that some change is going to happen already and is helping basically the society, companies, communities to adapt to that change. Does that make sense? So we're going to see some increase anyway, and so we're trying to adjust. But climate mitigation is, mainly working to reduce those emissions. And so working with companies is super important because they're the ones who are polluting the most and creating the problem. So that's when I really started to work more on climate mitigation with CDP. And the work was, working basically with companies so that they would set ambitious emission reduction targets. So that's like very specific, but if you want to look it up and you're interested, the initiative I was working for specifically is called Science-Based Targets Initiative. And I'm happy to chat more about it with anyone who's interested in that field, if there are any among you. And then I spent like 2 years working there, and then I actually joined WWF, where I'm working now, about 2 years ago now. So I initially joined to do something very similar than I was doing at CDP, so working with corporates so they will reduce their emissions. But that's where I say, like, don't feel like you have to stay in the same field all the time, because I've obviously changed a lot. And now I feel like I want to go back to working, on the more international development and more on the supporting developing countries to adapt to climate change. So since about a year ago, I've been splitting my time between the climate adaptation and the climate mitigation team at WWF. So I'm pretty much just mixing both things that I have a background in, and kind of trying to see what I want to do in the future. So I was lucky because I guess I wasn't super happy with the climate mitigation work anymore, and so I tried to get close to other folks in the climate team at WWF and see if there was a way I could work with them a little bit. And yeah, I managed to start working part-time with them, and I'm hoping that in the future I will be able to maybe just switch to that completely. But that's basically what I've been doing. And with the climate adaptation team, just so that you have an idea also of what we do, we are basically work on nature-based solutions for flood management. So that's one project I've been working with them. And what we do is trainings in all over the world, usually, but of course, because of the pandemic, we've been doing those online. And it's just, to promote more solutions for flood problems that are based on nature rather than just gray infrastructure like seawalls or stuff like that. So it's been super interesting, and it's very different from the other work, and I get to work more with developing countries, which I enjoy a lot. So yeah, I don't know if there are any other questions, but that was it for me.
Now everyone can ask their questions. Any questions, anyone? Oh, Andrea.
My question is for the three of you. What is one of the best pieces of advice that you received throughout your professional career?
I think The best advice that I was given was the advice that I kind of gave in my presentation, which is don't look for necessarily always just for pre-existing opportunities. Also create your own opportunities and think kind of what you can make. I've always been kind of like a strong believer that, you know, when you're looking at, for example, like a job board, everyone else can see those jobs too. So sometimes you want to be able to, through networking, kind of like what Sarah talked about, or through, you know, creating your own projects, even if that's something as simple as putting together like a wildlife themed TikTok. So you have something to show to like employers that you have experience in communication and outreach. Just being able to kind of take the initiative and come up with your own solutions.
I think I'll say don't limit yourself because of what you have learned. That's something that I think is really useful, because you know sometimes you see a job position or an internship position and you feel like you don't have the right background for that. But I think a lot of the learning is on the job. Honestly, I don't think any of the jobs I've had I knew how to do the work before I got them. And so I think just really not trusting yourself that you could do the job, and thinking about how everything that you've learned before, or the experiences you've had, can be transferred to that job or the internship that you want to have, is I think really important. Because you know we often are like, oh no, I can't do that, like I don't know about this, I don't know about that. And that helped me got my first internship that then led to my full-time job, and you know at CDP. Like I had no experience in that field, but I was just gonna apply, what the heck, you know, and then I got it. So yeah, I think just trust yourself, you know.
Yeah, I'll second all of those things. The big one I always got was, yeah, put yourself out there, which can be really scary, especially if you don't feel like you have a lot to offer, but you do. And yeah, put yourself out there, reach out to people, and don't forget that a lot of it is that human side to it. So don't be afraid to make friends along the way, and have fun if you can. I know it can be very stressful, like looking for jobs and figuring out how to be the best at this and best at this. But remember why you got into it in the first place.
Thank you so much.
Majid, you can ask your question.
Yeah, I had a question for Sarah specifically, because it seemed like you had a lot of bouncing between like fields. So did you see that, because you went from like one where it was like almost like plant ecology versus behavioral ecology or animal ecology, did you see a lot of crossing over in those fields, or were you like learning new things? I mean, obviously you would be learning new things in different fields, but how much crossover was there, and how did you like deal with that?
Sure. Yeah, I did bounce around quite a bit. The answer is that both, right? So there was a lot of crossover in terms of like project management. No matter what kind of project you have, you still have to plan it, organize it, get funds for it, follow through with it. And that's kind of the same throughout. Yeah, there's different procedures and different like standards at each place you might be working for, but the idea that you do follow the scientific method for the most part is the same. The methods themselves do differ quite a bit, right? Working with birds is not the same as collecting plants, but those kind of like Luz mentioned, you learn it as you go, as long as you're willing to like jump into it and yeah, learn quickly. And I think a big one is learning to ask questions, because you might come in, like, for example, like bats and birds. Both of them require mist netting. You might think that taking a bird out of the net is the same as taking a bat out of the net, but they can be quite different. So when you are transitioning from one place to another, don't be afraid to ask questions and like be vulnerable and showing that you don't know, because then you'll learn, I think.
Okay, thank you. Very good answer.
Well, I guess I have a general question. how do you see the wildlife or ecological profession like diversifying? For anyone who can answer that, if you see any changes.
What do you mean by diversifying?
Like, I guess more people of color or with disabilities, or how they identify, like the importance of representation. Do you see that more within your field?
Yeah. So I'm also co-organizer of Black Mammologist Week, so that's something that we kind of focus a lot on. I will say that, I mean, I've always been a minority in like wherever I work, because conservation is primarily of certain demographics. But I do see, and I am heartened by that there are more initiatives directly related to trying to increase diversity in the field. And I can think of things like Doris Duke and things like that, like like things that start even sometimes before undergrad that help train people up in the career. So there's more of those programs than there used to be when I was starting out, or that I was aware of. So that's great. I do think kind of the big challenge is the whole idea of a leaky pipeline, right? Like people might be really interested in it when they're young, but then it's hard to make it financially work. So the fact that there are more programs and there are more initiatives kind of that can help people, especially people who are financially disadvantaged as well as I was. I think that's really helpful, because that way, people are not going to be counted out of the field because they don't have certain advantages. So I would say it's improving, but we still have a long way to go. And the important thing, I think, in the field as well is that once people are there, like, it's great that we're here, but at the same time, it's like our organization's getting ready to be able to make us feel at home, and make us feel included as well. And I think that people are starting to become more aware of that, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, I would second that. I think for me personally, I saw a big change since last year, obviously, with all the events happening in the US. You probably saw like a lot of statements coming out from organizations, and WWF is definitely not the best example of diversity. But I think there's a lot of staff internally who care and who really are trying to push the organization to do something about it. And there's definitely been some work internally, which is encouraging. I agree with Gabby. I think there's just so much more work to do, especially, in the big green groups, just like very white and very, the majority of like leadership is white men, basically, and that definitely has to change. But I think it will take a long time, and I think part of the work is, like Gabby was saying, finding opportunities for people who may not have, may come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, to have internships, because that's like, one of the first barriers for people, just finding a paid internship. And if you don't have internship experience, then they might not want to hire you, and that's just like, creates a whole issue. So we're trying internally to create an internship program that would be fully paid, because I think that's like one of the biggest barriers, and I hope we're going to make it. But I think it comes to everyone pushing, staff internally and people from outside, and just, it's a long road, but
Yeah, I'll add to, again, all of those. If you are in a position that you can do outreach, especially for communities that need it the most. Sometimes part of the problem is that we don't even have contact to fields that are less diverse, because that might not be in the scope of our path, I guess, depending where we come from. And no matter where you end up, talk about it, I think, is a big thing. It can be uncomfortable, especially if you might be the only one representing a certain type of identity. And it sucks that that responsibility kind of falls on you if you're in that position. But I think of it as, we're paving the way for those coming after us, right? At one point, maybe we'll be the ones in charge of employment, and we won't have, you know, some of the blinders that people do now. And yeah, definitely take advantage of opportunities that cater to different communities. Sometimes they get you places that you might not otherwise have gotten. And then, yeah, you are at a point where you can make more change.
This will be the last question before we end the general meeting. But so Majid asked, do the three of you see opportunities opening up in the future for ecology and for international work? How do you break into that?
I can take the international one real quick. So it really depends what you're interested in doing. I'm not going to lie and say it's easy to break international work. I would think, you know, the barriers are even higher. What a lot of people do, I didn't do it this way, but a lot of people do, is that they get domestic experience first to kind of get their fundamentals down. For example, like US Fish and Wildlife has a lot of paid internships that are, you know, pretty accessible. So getting those first and getting your fundamentals down, learning your field work, learning some basic techniques, learning your networking, and then being able to take those skills and apply to different projects that are abroad is kind of a good stepping stone. I kind of did it a weird way where I just kind of yeeted myself right into the thing, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. But sometimes, you know, like by getting your skill set, even before that, I was volunteering at things like, you know, like local nature reserves and things like that. So I think by looking close to home, that's a good way to kind of start. In terms of breaking into that, I mean, honestly, if you're looking at things abroad and you're particularly interested in the region, I always recommend, kind of like I said, read your papers, find the people that keep coming up, learn who the leaders of your field are, and the upcoming leaders of your field. And it might be scary, but like DM them on Twitter, or, you know, get in contact with them, even if it's just to say, hey, I love your paper. I want to ask you about a piece of your methodology, just so they know your name. And start making those relationships. And once you make those relationships, they'll connect you to other people they know, because conservation is like super tiny. And then once that happens, then they might be able to tell you if an opportunity comes up that you wouldn't necessarily even know existed. So that's my advice for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can comment on the ecology piece, but I would say for like climate related stuff, there's definitely a lot of opportunities that are going to come out in the US as well as internationally funded by the US, I think, because of the change in the new administration. Obviously, I think that is going to, you know, they're planning to invest a lot in clean energy solutions. And I think also probably on adaptation outside of the US. So yeah, I think if you're interested in that field, I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities that are going to open up in the next couple of years. It's an exciting time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add to those two things. So if there's another question, I think Aiden maybe had his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, like some of us, you know, especially now in this age where it's like, you know, there's all this, you know, more, you know, progressive views on, like, you know, people with like disabilities, like learning disabilities, you know, like I have like stuff like ADHD and anxiety and stuff that makes it, you know, I have a different way of doing things than some other people when it comes to my work, you know, like takes me a little more time to get things done. And so, you know, right now it's looking like I'm probably going to be taking like an extra semester or even year. And I just like the way that things are going, you know, I'm not really sure when I'm going to start to have the time to really pursue all these internships yet, you know, because I got to get all this experience first. So I'm not like a total idiot when I go to these guys like, hey, I want to work for you. It's like, what do you know again? Like, you know, do you think there's a particular rush, you know, to get things done, or do you think it's all right if it takes me a little bit longer to get to that point where it's actually, you know, I have the time and the you know, experience to start, you know, working on these things?
I'm a big proponent of like taking your time. I mean, I do want to put out that you don't have to be an expert on things to put yourself out there, which again, like I said, can be really scary if you feel like, oh, maybe I won't know this one thing, but don't be afraid, or try not to be, I guess. But I know a lot of people who switched careers, for example, at 30, 40, and they're doing it, so if you're already, I'm assuming, ecology, science track.
Oh yeah, ecology.
Okay, so like, look, you're already on the right path, right? Imagine they started at 30 or 40. You have a lot of time. Not to say that like dilly-dally your way there, but like I feel like don't feel so much pressure to the point that it could be like maybe debilitating, right? To the point where you're not actually getting things done. Just do it at the pace that works for you would be my advice.
Yeah, I'll second that. This career is definitely a marathon. Most of us work in it our whole lives and retire fairly late. So you're gonna have lots of time. So just make sure that I always like to say that, like you're not gonna do your best work if you're not taking care of you. So put that self-care first, make sure that you're okay as a person, and then worry about, climbing the ladder or whatever. Because if it takes you a little bit longer, it's not gonna matter because you're gonna get there anyway. And nobody's timing you. So definitely take your time and do what's best for you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so it is 7:04. So we're gonna end the meeting right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. If you want to like have your emails and like for anyone who has additional questions, if you want to like put your emails in the group chat, you can do so. Or if you want me to send me information where I can send everyone, I can do that too. But thank you so much. I'll be giving you some emails later. Thank you again. And honestly, like this is a very different semester for us. So we haven't had like 3 guest speakers from like different places. So it's like, this is really great for us, but thank you so much again. Yeah, we're gonna hang on the call. So because we're gonna do some quiz bowl. That's why you saw the meeting from like 6 to 8. We have something after, but thank you so much again.
Great. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. And thanks for organizing, Fleury.
Yes. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks. Keep it up, you guys.
Oh my God, that was so great. I love that.
They're all so cool.